Welcome to Let's Talk Evolution, the podcast where real life experience meets the complexities of the tech industry. In each episode, we dive into specific topics with thought leaders who know the systems, the structures, and the nuances that drive the industry. And the series is all about unpacking the inner workings of tech and learning for people who understand it best. So this specific podcast is focused on AI and the evolution of AI within finance and financial services specifically. Really delighted to be joined by Jonathan Chan, who is a global innovation and AI leader, currently global co-head of AI and data innovation at Julius Baer with 20 years experience in global financial institutions and top-tier consulting companies. So, Jonathan, thank you very much for joining. Be great if you just do a quick intro on yourself.
Perfect. Thanks, Jake, and thanks for having me. Really great to be able to share some insights on this topic. Right, we've been doing quite a bit of work around it. So a quick introduction to myself. So I'm John Chan. I co-head globally a unit called AI, Data and Innovation. No prizes for what we do there. For Bank Julius Baer. My role, basically, I'm based in Singapore. My role looks at how we drive the whole AI transformation for the bank globally and looking at how we can deploy new capabilities that enable us to really build the future of private banking and wealth management with technology. It's been quite a journey so far. I think I've been in the bank now close to 4 years and really it's just a race in terms of how we're looking at driving and using emerging technologies for the future.
Fantastic. So I guess instead of asking where to start, let me kind of flip it and just ask, what are the most common missteps that you've seen organizations, particularly financial services organizations, make when they first try to scale AI? And I guess with a follow-up, how can leaders in current financial institutions responsible for AI and AI initiatives avoid those missteps?
Well, I think it's a good question, right? Something that we've been thinking about. The AI race has really heated up over the last 3 years, right? And even before that, there's a lot of financial institutions have been doing a lot around AI, data science, all of these topics for decades already. Now, I think in the last 2-3 years, as it's heated up, we see really the biggest challenge, right, is really around this whole idea of this lack of this whole clear vision of what you really want to get out of AI. And I think it's this fear of missing out that I think it's driving a lot of that challenge, right? And if I look at it across the board, right, and not naming names, I think in general, organizations have just been too focused on AI by business case, right? When the reality in today's context is we really need to move towards an AI by conviction case. And I think when we look at this, it's really about the message that we say we believe that AI is going to fundamentally change the way that we operate. AI is going to be a force enabler. AI is going to be the baseline that what we need. I think that's the conviction case that we need today, right? Moving into we were towards the end of 2025 already. Now, one of the predictions I had earlier was that one of the biggest challenge or one of the biggest focus this year is really about scaling AI within financial services, and we're starting to see that. It should have moved a little bit faster, but I think if we think about it, I think maybe next year will be where we'll see a huge amount of scaling, considering that we're seeing a lot of big programs being rolled out across the globe, across different financial institutions across the globe. But if you ask me really about, how can we really try and scale AI quickly, more effectively from an FS perspective, it's really about how you move fast out of that POC mode, right? And I think this is critical. Some studies have come out to say that, pretty much most AI POCs never really make it to production. And I think the real value that you get out of the technology is only when it goes into real production. And in this aspect, right, we really have to flip the switch in terms of how we think about going from a 0 to 100. I think when we take the innovation lens, we always think of it as, okay, what is the first use case we're going to work on? What is that 0 to 1 that we want to execute on? And I think that's one of those challenges, right? You go 0 to 1, that's great. But now how do you scale? You run a pilot with 20 people. Now, how do you roll it out across thousands of employees across the globe, right? So how do you go from a 1 to 100? I think that is one of the fundamental challenges that we see a lot over the last few years in all the POCs. It's really easy to start a POC. It's really hard to scale one. So now I think the whole focus and shift, I think this needs to happen across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And AI is such a kind of broad space. So, engineering, data science have been the traditional like divisions or subsectors. And then you've got ethics and governance. Which roles or skill sets, bearing in mind the challenges that you articulated earlier, do you feel like are going to be most critical in the next 3 to 5 years? And why do you think those specific skill sets would be most critical?
Well, I think fundamentally for a FS company, for example, a financial services firm, a bank, we all and pretty much every organization, I think we need to build a muscle, right, that allows us to be able to participate in this new AI economy. The reality behind it is that AI needs to now become everybody's co-pilot. I think everyone today, I think a lot of people I know, myself included, rely on it on a day-to-day basis. And I tend to, when I look at it, I tend to break it up into two different pockets, right? We have the people who are building AI tools and capabilities for the organization, and B, the ones who are going to be using or governing it, right? And if we think about what are the key fundamental skills that organizations like a bank requires, right? It will be, I think I just put it out 3 pieces, right? Very simply, one is AI engineering. I think that's key. This is the backbone of all the AI systems. How do you fit it in, integrate it into existing platforms and systems? And this is now, I believe, one of the biggest and core skill sets that every organization needs. Fundamentally, because when we look at the tech companies putting out foundational models, those foundational models need to be integrated. Hence, the AI engineering aspect is extremely important for most organizations. The second is really about data science, right? If you really want to go deep into adapting and fine-tuning foundational AI models for different types of use cases, you need to have data scientists. You need to be able to go deep into it. You need to be able to figure out how do you manage this, how do you manage the large data sets. You need to be able to drive all of that, right? And when I say data science, it's not just talking about data scientists. You're talking about the analysts, the team members, the data engineers who are going to be looking at cleaning the data, making sure the quality is there. I think fundamentally is really about this entire spectrum that what we looked at data science on the back end over the last decade. And finally, I think it's the area of really product and design, right? So it's not just about the technical back end and how it works, right? But it's also an understanding about how users are going to be interacting with these tools and capabilities that is going to be fundamental in success. Because it's great to be able to build out a new solution, a new front end, a new platform. The biggest challenge is going to be how do you drive the adoption? And one of the aspects around driving adoption is really about making sure that you have a great user experience. B, you're really building a product that is fit for purpose, that solves the problem, right? Because fundamentally, I think most organizational initiatives, programs tend to fail in the area of change management. So this aspect is quite critical, right? And rather very critical in working together, because you're going to be able to have to understand what the business users need and figure out what are the requirements and how do you translate that for the technical teams to be able to develop and customize whichever solution that you're going to need. So that's more on the technical side for those who are building those solutions, right, internally. And then if I jump to the other end of the spectrum, talking about the users, right, or the people who are governing AI, as you mentioned earlier, right, the governance and the ethics behind it is fundamental. I think the skill sets is about upskilling yourself, right? And these are more business people upskilling themselves, and being able to understand how the technology works. So understanding fundamentally how AI systems work, right? You don't have to know that, you don't have to go deep into the technical details, but you have to understand fundamentally how it works, right? And this will allow you to have a more mature perspective of what it can or cannot do. I think the problem that a lot of business users tend to have is that they think to have they think on the basis of AI is going to be this magic silver bullet that solves all my problems. Unfortunately, sad to say that's not going to be the case. It takes time, right? Building out new methodologies, approaches, frameworks that you're going to deploy, I can share, right? It takes years sometimes, for us to be able to deploy some of these things much faster. Now, the second aspect is really about understanding the whole legal regulatory framework, right, and the requirements around it, because understanding that allows us to be able to help govern AI better, right, and be able to evolve along with the ecosystem, along with the changes in the regulatory regimes, as well as the requirements around what guardrails we need to put in place. I think this is something that's pretty core for a regulated industry like financial services, that we really understand and have that know-how around how to look at the legal and regulatory guardrails that's required for AI governance. And finally, I think the last one is really around for everyone working in a corporate environment. I think needs to understand how do you do prompt engineering and how do you get to improve your own skills so that you're going to get the best and the most out of AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a kind of follow-on question specifically from that. So you talked about regulatory requirements within financial services, but looking at the broader kind of industry sector specialism. So I think historically in a candidate short, job rich market, the skill set of the individual from a technical standpoint has been paramount because that's where the shortages has been. But with AI and AI adoption, how important do you think the business knowledge is, like understanding what the organization or the individual team within that organization are trying to achieve? So to give some context to that question, like we're a executive search company focused on technology and data leadership roles. I would imagine if we engage somebody to help our business with AI and AI adoption from a FMCG or a F&B company, it'd be very difficult for them to really understand the nuances of what we do on a day-to-day basis and our business goals, and probably take quite a long time to upskill in those areas. So how important do you think that business knowledge is? So, obviously from a regulatory standpoint, it would be the specific regulatory bodies in the location that you exist within. But aside of purely focusing on regulation, like if somebody is going to enable behavioral change or be a enabler for behavioral change, how important do you think understanding the business and the goals of the users would be in somebody trying to take on that type of role?
I think it's an interesting one, right? Because I think if you think about it, the spectrum of it typically looks at on one end of the spectrum, you have the technical, pure technical skills. On any other end of the spectrum, you've got business skills and non-domain expertise. I think in this era now, what we're seeing is that convergence, right? Where you're having individuals who are domain experts in their area, regardless of which industry it is, right? That is now being able to be supercharged with AI on the technical side as well, right? Making it easier to do it, right? From a natural language perspective. And I think that for me is a huge innovation in the last few years, right? Is that now you're seeing a convergence of and maybe even in a sense some competition, right? That building up business domain expertise, right, will allow you to be able to get better outcomes from technology or from AI, right, directly without as much technical experience or skill sets that's required. There's some of it still required, but at the end of the day, I think being able to understand how an industry works, I think is paramount in terms of how you're going to apply and adopt AI in those particular instances. And I think it's one where we're starting to see how starting to see this need to have people on both sides of the house, but at the same time, we also have to have a lot who we're now starting to look at the skills that we need that is sitting right in the middle, right? We are looking at leaders, we're looking at leaders who would have that ability to marry the business domain expertise and understanding of how to build strategy, how do you build business requirements, and how do you look at products and services for that particular domain, right? But being able to understand how the technology works so that they can have a closer interface with the people who are building it on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. And then look, I guess looking aside of financial services then, from a domain standpoint, other lessons or innovations that you've seen from other industries that, that use AI that you think financial institutions should be paying attention to? I guess the obvious one that would come to people's minds would be big tech, but any other industries where you've seen innovation that financial services could benefit from paying attention to?
Well, I think FIs need to run their own race. I think for financial institutions or any large corporation, this AI race, if you're not a big tech, and this AI race is really a marathon, right? Where and my personal point of view is that large corporates who are trying to drive an AI transformation within their organization, they need to think of it as a marathon and not be caught up in the whole AI sprint. It's very easy to get caught up in the AI sprint, right? If you open LinkedIn today, every other post is about AI, pretty much about it, right? How do people are using it? How do you prompt? And it's pretty much every other nuance around how people are using AI. And it's very easy to get caught up in this. I need to sprint on this, but we don't necessarily have the breadth of power or that how would I put it, that burst of power to be able to do that sprint. We're large, we're slow, but at the same time, I think one of the things that we have is endurance. And being able to leverage that endurance, I think, is going to be critical. So for me, my personal view, don't get too caught up in that, right? Focus on running this race and building those capabilities that are you have defined that will be a success factor for you, right? When you're going through this. But I think fundamentally, one of the things that FIs need to learn, right, is really to change the way that we think, act, and at the same time build solutions, right? We have to move, for the industry itself to move faster. The collaboration, open innovation is a must. We have to be open to collaborating with researchers, with big tech, with other organizations to find ways that we can solve some of these challenges. And I think it's one where we have to identify very quickly where those gaps are. And from there, find a way to plug the gap as quickly as possible, right? Learning from the market is paramount, right? It's critical that we look out and we take an open innovation approach towards how we can build these solutions, because the way that we've been doing it for the last 20 years is not going to be the way that we do it for the next 10. And that's a reality. And for me, I think in my role, when I look at it, I tend to look a lot into the market. I look a lot into how other large organizations are driving their transformation, how they're looking and focus areas around, adoption, around usage. I think for me, that for me is really, really critical in that sense, right? And of course, you have this ambition or this, big ambition to become like a big tech, to operate like a big tech. Yes, it is possible, but I think it also takes a lot of conviction to be able to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you mentioned the kind of rhetoric that is off the scale at the moment, where it comes to people talking about AI, some people trying to add value on, LinkedIn with specific use cases, but there's also quite a lot of, forecasting of what the future might look like with AI adoption at the heart of it. And I posted on LinkedIn the other day just out of interest, because some people that I speak to seem to be suggesting that AI will be like Excel. It's a tool that people will use to do things more efficiently. So if you think when Excel came about for accountants and finance teams, it was quite a groundbreaking tool, but it's still a tool that people use. And then at the other end of the spectrum, some people are forecasting, mass unemployment, almost Armageddon when it comes to, what AI may may lead to, and the next 10 years being a sort of dystopian reality of people trying to find a new way of doing things. Like, a couple of well-known podcasts have had guests on, like Mo Gaudat, who's forecasting pretty cataclysmic change in the near term in terms of years. So I guess on that spectrum between Excel and Armageddon, where would you sit?
Wow, I would say, if you think, it's a very interesting one, right? Because right now, I think I'm on both sides of the fence, right? I think on one end, one of the things that I believe very strongly is that, as like you say, AI is today an LLM chatbot that is a baseline requirement that you need, similar to your Microsoft Excel, right? It's like when you join an organization, what do you get? They give you a laptop, they give you PowerPoint, they give you email, Outlook, different, all these tools, right? Or rather variations of these tools. And, one of the expectations in today's context is now an LLM chatbot. Everybody needs that, right? It's a baseline. And that it is in a way, is no longer a competitive advantage anymore, right? It becomes table stakes. It means that every organization, it's basically the baseline that you need to have. Now, I think the Armageddon scenario is really when we think about how the applied AI comes in. It's no longer that LLM chatbot. Is when you have AI systems that's operating in the background that basically the user only interacts with the output of the system, right? And I think this applied AI is where the competitive advantage for organizations is going to come from, because it's no longer a commodity. Right, it is something that you build a competitive advantage over because you have an AI system that does certain calculations, perhaps, or and that gives you certain outputs. For example, recommendations on portfolios, or that maybe that's your secret sauce at the end of the day. So for me, I'm kind of hovering between both. One day is this, one day is that, but the reality is that we have to take both sides of the coin, right? And really, just like I said, is running a marathon, being clear of what your goal is, right, and being able to enable your organization to get to that end goal that you're trying to reach, right? And at the same time, right, listen to what's out in the market, take a leaf from a page from others who have done it well, right? And try, experiment. There are times you're going to fail, but that's the reality in this space, right? There's no proven, or there's no perfect implementation. So there's times you're going to fail, there's times you're going to succeed on a stellar basis.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and I think really interesting things that you covered off there. I think that's a great place to conclude, and I think reflect on some of those ideas that you shared. It's been brilliant speaking to you, and I think some of those ideas and viewpoints are super interesting for people listening. So thank you so much for joining us, John, and really appreciate everything that we went through today.
Thanks, Jake, and thanks so much for having me. I'm always open to having a conversation about this topic. It's really exciting. Love to share notes as well, because at the end of the day, it's learning, collaboration, understanding what worked, what hasn't worked, and figuring out. I think this is where we are today, right? And thanks so much for having me.